Uncannily quiet in here this morning. Good morning, everyone. It is now 9:30, and so I resume the hearing. I don't think that there's any need for me to do a big formal opening or anything like that in present company. So if I could just ask the Programme Officer, Carol Crooks, to do the housekeeping for us, please.
Good morning. There's no scheduled fire alarms planned for the examination, so if the alarm does sound, can you please make your way to the nearest exit, which is usually at the front, and gather on the corner of Claremont Terrace outside the GMB building, which is to your left as you go out the building. Do not stop to retrieve any belongings, but exit as quickly and safely as possible following the green fire exit routes. And do not enter the building until a fire marshal or member of the fire service tells you it's safe to do so. Door security, only use the main doors to the front to access and exit the building. For security purposes, do not use the side doors unless you're a wheelchair user, and there's someone there to open and close it after you. Just to make you aware, there are other users in the building who are having language classes, so we're not the only ones in the building. The toilets are situated on that corridor there. Water is available around the table, and also for people up in the gallery in the foyer. Other refreshments are available on Gilly Gate. Also, as previous sessions, it is being filmed, so if you've got any issues about being filmed, if you let me know. And the Wi-Fi details are on either side of the room. It's Citadel Guest, password General Booth 1883. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that, Carol. Just to get everyone settled into the hearing, I think perhaps if we just do very brief introductions, starting with the council side and going around the table.
Sir, thank you. Good morning. Matthew Henderson on behalf of the City of York Council, instructed by the City Solicitor.
Morning, everyone. Laura Bartle, the City Council, as a Principal Planner.
Hello, everyone. Julian Ridge, City of York Council, Sustainable Transport Manager.
Hello, Russ Porter, Porter Planning Economics, working with the Council on assessing the viability of the local plan.
Some got round, it's a short table. Councillor Mark Waters, Osborne and Derwent Ward.
Dave Merritt, York Labour Party and York Environment Forum.
Good morning, Neil Jones, consultant to Rapley's, representing British Sugar.
Thank you very much, and good morning all, and welcome to the first of a number of days during which we are going to look at Matter 4 and strategic sites. Unless there's anything else I need to cover, I think we can just get straight down to it, Mr. Henderson, can't we?
Yes, sir, that's correct.
Well, that is jolly good news. So I am quite simply, as previously, going to follow the issues as they are set out in the Matters, Issues and Questions paper, starting then with issue 4.1, policy SS4, which relates to site ST5 and York Central. As we go through, what I'm generally going to do, I think, is look to the council in the first instance. And with this site and others, indeed, it's going to be helpful if the council can tell me precisely what the position is in relation to planning applications and or permissions. And as well, I note that, again, for a number of sites, including this one, the council is proposing some main modifications. So if you could flag that up for me as we go through and explain the reason for those proposed main modifications, I'd be extremely grateful.
So yes, of course, all the ones that we're dealing with this morning either have permission in one form or the other, or there is an application in, so hopefully we will be able to give you an update and take them relatively swiftly. Most of the modifications are for the purposes of reflecting those permissions or applications, but we'll explain that as we come along. So ST5, Ms Bartle can introduce this one in the usual way.
Thank you. Yes, so ST5 is our York Central site. This is our significant brownfield site in the city centre and is being brought forward in partnership with Homes England, Network Rail, the City Council and the Railway Museum, and is has the benefit now of an outline planning application for a mix of uses, including what's referred to as up to 2,500 homes, along with other uses relating to employment, commercial and other commercial activity, car park and community uses. That planning permission covers approximately 46.2 hectares of the site, so it doesn't cover the whole allocation as it's shown on the policies map, but it does cover a vast majority. The areas that are excluded from the not part of the application are limited to those areas that are adjacent or part of the currently part of railway, ancillary railway works and things like that. So they're not anticipated to come forward for significant development on there at the moment. In addition to the outline that was granted in 2019, there have since been 2 reserve matters applications. The first, which was approved in 2020.
Okay, so the permission you were telling me about, that was an outline permission?
It was indeed, yes. Sorry, apologies for not making that clear. Yes. The reserve matters application, the first reserve matters application relates to primary infrastructure works that are required to bring forward the site. So that's the main road into the site with associated other roads, infrastructure, landscaping, and some alterations to the wider road network. In addition to that, there is an application which is still pending and was deferred at the Council's committee last month, and that's for reserve matters relating specifically to the National Railway Museum. And so following the approval of those reserve matters relating to those primary infrastructure works, which was in November 2020, significant site clearance works have begun and archaeology work is being undertaken with the intention that those primary infrastructure works are due to commence later this summer. Yeah.
Yes. So we've got a planning permission, so we have a deliverable site, no clear evidence to the contrary, but we have some evidence on delivery timescales and rates. So we've set this out for you, CYC 76C, and it's PDF page 101, but Miss Bartle can give you the short summary of that.
I can. Clearly, this is a challenging site in many ways, but notable progress has been made, and the work that's been ongoing on it over a number of years is bringing forward some real, making real positive steps towards delivery. And currently, the site is going through a developer procurement process, and that's anticipated to come to fruition early next year. The anticipation is for it to be a single developer that takes on the site, but that's not to say that multiple parts of the site can't be or won't be developed simultaneously. So in terms of the delivery rates that we've forecast in that trajectory that Mr. Henderson referred you to, we are looking for first delivery of homes in 24-25, with the rates that are set out in there rising to around 140 dwellings per year, and that's related to the high dense nature of the scheme and the fact that much of it, well, not all of it, but much of it will be an apartment-led.
Sorry,
scheme.
rising to how many per year did you say?
143. But that's much later in the plan period.
And all of those rates are agreed with and aligned with the Homes England build programme and indeed the phasing strategy, which was part of one of the discharge of condition applications that was approved last year. So that is something to which we attach great weight and gives us confidence in those rates moving forward.
Would you like me to turn to modifications?
Yeah.
So on this side, there are a couple of modifications that we have proposed. The first relates to table 5.2 in policy H1, which we were indeed looking at last week. And it's just to correct the site area, which is identified in that table as 35 hectares. That's actually the net developable area, so that needs to be corrected to relate to the actual site area, which is one of the points we also raised last week, but we will pick that up as part of those modifications. And the estimated yield is being proposed to show 2,500 dwellings, which is what the upper limit of the approval relates to. But note so that approval does identify a range between 1,700 and 2,500.
Yeah, as I had it, the plan as submitted allocates it for between 1,700 and 2,500, doesn't it?
Indeed, in the policy,
But
yes.
but the main modification is more around, as I understand it, how many of those will be delivered in the plan period?
Correct. So yes, if we turn to policy SS4, where that's dealt with, yes, the modification in there relates to the delivery expectation in the plan period, which aligns with our updated trajectory.
So rather than 1,500 in the plan period, we have 950?
Correct, yes. There are a number of other...
Sorry, Phil, forgive me. Can you just remind me, I don't think, or do I, have a trajectory that shows some of the changes that are in the Council's most recent schedule of main mods, so proposed main mods. So that change from 1,500 to 950, as one example, I don't think is shown so far in an up-to-date trajectory. Have I got that right?
That is shown in the EWEX CYC 76, so the Gantt chart that's at the back of that. So that figure 950 relates to what we've projected in that.
Okay, so I've got that wrong. No, thank you for clarifying.
So yeah, just to be clear, so all of those related changes that we'll cover over the next few days in terms of plan period projections are ones that the Council has aligned to that trajectory. So it has a base date of April 2022, just to be clear. Yeah, just a couple of other points to draw your attention to on policy SS4. So it's necessary to include the word approximately in relation to the 100,000 square metres of office use that's proposed, necessary for flexibility, rather precise to say it would be exactly 100,000 square metres. There are some minor mods related to the update to the use class order that we will need to address as part of the modifications as well, to correctly identify those uses given the those changes. And so I think that's it for the modifications that we're proposing on that policy.
Okay, who else is here to talk about this site this morning? Mr. Merritt?
Thank you. As you'll know, we've objected to the way this site has been proposed to be developed from the start in terms of our submissions for a number of reasons. If I start with housing, we consider that the proposed upper limit is a severe overdevelopment of this site. It means it will basically be apartments only, which does not meet the housing needs of the city. It will just end up as more buy-to-let, Airbnb, investment properties that will not serve the local housing market. And even the council's own evidence base, as it points out in its submission, actually only supports 1,700. The very few facilities are, in terms of community, are being provided in this development. They're dependent on sites and facilities outside this area, which are already overloaded and often substandard. On one side, you've got St Paul's School, has no playing fields. It's in end of a terraced street, partly occupying some former terraced houses. And that's the sort of thing that, in effect, they will displace some of the education needs too. So it's a highly unsatisfactory development in terms of how it provides for housing in this city, in terms of whether it will actually be a genuinely sustainable community. And then if we look at the employment, we are opposed to the modification that the council is proposing. This is the premier opportunity for expanding the employment base in this city in terms of providing high quality, well-paid jobs, given its location right next to the railway station. We are very concerned that given the site ownership is in Homes England, if you remove the 100,000 requirement, it will be only too easy for them to eat in to the employment through a further application. And we would be absolutely opposed to that, and we feel you should resist this amendment. We would, however, say, in terms of the employment uses, it's proposed solely for office use. We actually think there ought to be a little bit of flexibility, whilst we think the overwhelming use should be for office. We do think there ought to be some recognition of other specialist employment needs outside of that. Finally,
so forgive me, Mr. Mayor, what do you have in mind there when you say specialist employment needs?
Well, the Labour MP for York, Rachel Maskell, has been working very hard to try and achieve a rail academy facility for this city, but there's also potential for some spin-offs out of the university and other key activities which ought to be near the station in terms of the linkages to the national rail network.
Forgive my ignorance, what's a rail academy?
The Rail Academy is basically a training and education and skills facility for providing, training people up for the jobs in the rail industry. The rail industry has a major aged workforce. It needs a lot of new employees to fill its employment needs in the future.
Okay,
Rail Academy is a means to help deliver it. Yeah, thank you.
So that's about train drivers and others that work in that sector, is that right?
There will be a lot of professional and technical jobs in terms of rail signalling. There's major digital advances going on. And so, as I say, a range of well-paid potential jobs. The third aspect of this site is the way that the planning application drove a coach and horses through the transport policies of the local plan and completely ignored the policy which said no through traffic should not be catered for, and it has done exactly that. There is quite a detailed set of arguments in the York Civic Trust submission, which I draw your attention to, on the transport aspects, which Tony May and the colleagues have contributed to. We would actually like to see a strengthening of the policies to both ensure that if there are any revised applications coming through, they are bound to a policy to remove the through traffic route into the city centre. And that's for both in terms of avoiding congestion, which this site, because of the large amount of parking, which is the other issue that we would like to amend the policies to reduce significantly, is going to have major impacts on the whole of the already over-congested city's road network. More seriously, it will deliver over 1,000 vehicles an hour into the Lendal Gyratory, which is a key point on the Inner Ring Road through which most of the buses in this city pass, and will have significant deleterious effects on providing actually a decent, reliable public transport service in this city. That traffic will also go through the Museum Square, which was meant to be a prime pedestrian plaza between the railway station and the National Railway Museum. Whilst in the weekday, to be fair, that most of that will be in the morning and evening rush hour. On Saturdays, it is likely to be at the prime arrival, the peak traffic will be at the prime arrival time for visitors to the Rail Museum, and what was meant to be a pedestrian space will be dominated by a major traffic artery, which is again frankly criminal in terms of providing the right setting for the Railway Museum and for people arriving in this city. Thank you very much.
Councillor Waters.
Thank you, Inspector. Just very briefly, for a bit of balance, the housing numbers were spoken of there. The council are now proposing 2,500 as an upper limit. When this was first announced, when the redevelopment of the teardrop site was first announced to the York public in 1999, it was going to save all our greenbelt from development because it was going to provide 3,000 houses. So I've just thrown that in for a bit of balance there.
So 5 points from us. Firstly, residential and the numbers. Our matter statement was misquoted to you. The evidence base supported at least 1,700 homes. The in-principle acceptability of 2,500 was therefore not precluded, and it was demonstrated satisfactorily through the application process and the interrogation there. This is a brownfield site in an excellent city centre location, precisely the place where York needs to be delivering houses to meet its housing need. That's the first point. Second point is the opposition to the modification of the word approximately. So this is approximately 100,000 square metres. I think it's important to put this in context, where are we now? Well, the planning application that was approved secured 88% of that 100,000 square metres. It was a little over 87,500 square metres secured in that.
Apologies, Mr. Henderson, could you run those figures past me again?
87,500 square metres. 87500, sir. Of the 100,000 in the plan. As Ms Bartle said, and as the committee report acknowledged, the planning permission does not cover the entirety of the allocation, and it was the view of officers at the time of the application, and it remains the view of the council, that there is potential to bring forward additional floor space outside of the red line area of that planning permission. In any event, as we've set out in our matter statement, this policy on a site of this nature cannot be unduly prescriptive, and the insertion of the word approximately is appropriate to bring the flexibility. That's the second point. The third point deals with the flexibility in employment uses. You were told that there were too many officers. So if you look at the penultimate bullet point in policy SS4,
My apologies, Mr. Henderson.
No, of course.
Yeah, so just on the 100,000 square metres point, as I read the policy at the moment, well, I'll read it out. It says, land within York Centre is allocated for X number of dwellings, of which a minimum of 1,500 will be delivered in the planned period, and 100,000 square metres of Office B1A. The way it's drafted, it's unclear to me whether that 100,000 square metres is also a minimum within that sentence.
It's not, sir. The comma before the and is doing a lot of work there, but it's not a minimum.
They sometimes do.
So that hopefully clarifies that. We might look at redrafting the order of that sentence, perhaps, as a minor modification. We'll take that away, sir, but I can clarify it's not a minimum. The fourth point I was on was about the third point I was on was about the flexibility in employment uses. You'll see the penultimate bullet point in the mix of uses that will be permitted includes rail uses. So dealing specifically with the concern raised there, well, it's actually included in the policy expressly. It's not clear to the council what other words or uses need to be included in that list to satisfy the objectives. We say nothing more is required. The fourth point is on community facilities. Ms Bartle can explain this point.
Yes, so in terms of what's provided for through the application, the assessment was made of those proposals and found to be acceptable in terms of what the proposal was seeking to bring forward. So it looks at a number of uses, childcare, healthcare and community facilities, although it doesn't prescribe their exact locations through the application. Suitable conditions were attached to that application to ensure that those facilities are secured.
And what kind of facilities are we talking about?
Well, for example, sir, on healthcare, condition 35 requires a primary care facility for up to 4 GPs, as an example.
I think there's also an argument that the proposals for the National Railway Museum, in terms of what that will achieve in terms of additional learning and kind of local offering as a facility that can be used not just as a tourist attraction, makes some wider community benefits in those senses too.
So that's community facilities, the fourth point. The fifth point is about transport. Now, Mr Ridge will address this, but I preface it by saying a number of the criticisms that you heard today were essentially battles fought and lost at the application stage, but Mr Ridge will explain slightly more on that.
Okay, thanks very much, Mr Henderson. I think with the
Apologies, Mr. Ridge. If you just bear with me one moment. I don't know if this is for you, Mr. Henderson, or someone else. But just in terms of the permission, for the avoidance of any doubt, has that been implemented?
No, not as yet, but will do with the works that I described coming forward in the summer, those primary infrastructure works.
And although it's not implemented, site clearance works did begin in the early part of last year. So the wheels are in motion, if I can put it like that.
Sorry, sir, I've just been advised the contract was signed last week and works have now started.
So it has been implemented?
Yes, sorry. But
you are advised.
As recently as in the last few days, so my evidence was not quite up to date. Apologies for that.
Okay, yes. So in terms of transport, I mean, obviously with a very large site like this, there is an active discussion about what the best way to serve it by transport is. The outline planning permission that was granted in March 2019 provides a tremendous amount of sustainable transport infrastructure for that site. It is only accessible from the city centre via a shuttle working arrangement through a tunnel underneath the throat of the railway station, which gives half of the road width to cyclists. There are a number of stretches of bus lane which are associated with the development, including one within the development itself and two outside of the development. There is a wide range of cycle lanes and cycle route upgrades associated with it. And there is a Section 106 contribution of nearly £4 million relating specifically for that development. And in addition to that, there is a penalty payment of £2.5 million if the developer is unable to meet the sustainable transport targets for the development. So my view is that it is in fact a development that's going to be very accessible by sustainable modes, particularly by bus. It's already at the heart of the city's bus network, but there will be two park and ride routes running all the way through it. It's obviously at the heart of the rail network as well. It will enjoy a very high level of sustainable transport accessibility, and the intention is that that will translate directly into very high levels of access to that site by sustainable modes. I think there was also a specific point made about the amount of parking on the site. The amount of parking...
Parking and through traffic, I think.
Yes. Okay, well, I'll deal with those in turn. So parking on the site, there is a significant amount of parking associated with the redevelopment. That is borne by a view that in order for the commercial parts of the development to be viable, some degree of parking has to be provided, and that parking also serves the railway station. So a lot of the people making use of that parking will be making use of it in order to access a sustainable mode of transport. It's a consolidation of the parking which is already on site. I think it is a very small increase, but actually in terms of the fact that the density of development of the site is increasing a lot, it's a proportionate decrease to how the site is used. In terms of through traffic, there will be some through traffic. I would need to see, I must admit, I didn't recognise the 1,000 vehicles an hour figure on what's called Lendl Arch Gyratory. It's a congested gyratory in the middle of York. I would need to check the traffic impact assessment to be sure of that. But the site, as I already said, is only going to be accessible from the city centre via this shuttle working arrangement So traffic will actually be queued to go through an underpass that goes underneath the throat of the railway station. So it will, whilst it will be possible to make a through trip,
Yeah, so my apologies, Mr. Ridge. I'm not quite envisaging this. I'm not sure if I need to, but just in case I do,
yes.
could you sort of describe that to me?
The shuttle working. Okay, so in order to get from the centre of York to York Central, you have to pass underneath the eastern end of the railway station. And in order to do that, there is a tunnel which is, 200 metres long? Mr. Merritt, do you have a view on how long the tunnel is? Yes, let's say 150 metres long. At the moment, that just functions as a two-way road. As the York Central development comes forward, that two-way road will be converted so that half of the width of the road will be available for cyclists and will link into a series of cycle lanes that take you all the way through the development, because the new access road has a cycle lane all the way along it. And the other half will be for vehicles. Now, obviously, the road isn't wide enough to have two directions of traffic running on half the road width, so access to that section will be controlled by traffic lights. So in order to travel from the middle of York into York Central, you will have to queue to go through the tunnel section. So our view is that the journey times involved in that will act to reduce demand from the city centre into York Central. Yes, the assessment of this was done through the traffic impact assessment, and our view was that this was a satisfactory approach for it. If you're approaching the tunnel from the western side, so the outside of York, in a bus, you'll be able to use a bus lane to avoid that queue. So buses are given a substantial advantage through the tunnel.
But so our takeaway on this is very interesting, but not necessary for your purposes today.
Mr. Merritt.
The figure on the traffic quoted in the Civic Trust's response, which I assume is correct, is 1,045, Julian. So it's still a very substantial amount, notwithstanding the bottleneck. And whilst there are bus priorities inbound up to before the start of Museum Square, or part a little bit into it, there is still a substantial section after that. And more particularly, there are no bus priorities outbound from the Lendal Gyratory, with a severe risk that because of the one-way working, you will get traffic backing up to the Lendal Gyratory. But I make the wider point on the traffic that, if I remember correctly, the large amount of space nominally committed to car parking at the moment is because there was a large temporary car park arrangement which is not long-standing. But the point is there will be a lot of additional traffic generated by all the car parking on site. If you have two park and rides serving the site as well as the rail station, why is it necessary to have so much commercial traffic to the site? It should be basically operational only, similar to a lot of other city centre properties. The 1,045 figure is similar to some of the more congested sections of the inner ring road in terms of the scale of the traffic that implies. So it is a very substantial amount of traffic. So I stick to the points I've made, and as I say, I draw the inspector's attention to the Civic Trust submission, which goes into more detail. In terms of the response on the housing, I had no response about the mix of properties and the issue as to whether the provision of large volumes of apartment-type developments will in any way address the local housing needs in this city. And by, as I say, keeping the numbers towards the maximum end, it will maximise the amount of flats instead of having a more balanced mix of the type of properties, including properties that are suitable for families in this area. Families do not just want to live on the outskirts of the city. Many families would actually like to live in the city as well. Thank you.
I think what I might do is hear any further points from this side of the table, as it were, before coming back to the council for its final response. So I don't know if there's anything else, Mr. Merritt, whilst you have the floor, that you wanted to say.
I've hopefully covered all the points I wanted to make. No doubt I'll remember something later, but that's my problem.
Well, no, that's fine, and let us not forget that you know, I have the written statements and representations, etc. So hopefully you'll have remembered whatever it is that you might have forgotten at some point and already have written it down somewhere. Anything from you, Councillor Waters? Okay, if I can ask the council for its final reply, if it wishes to make one, but it might be helpful for me, I think, to know something about the housing mix and whether that is fixed through the planning permission.
So yes, Ms Bartle is just pulling up the mix. The assessment was as against the SHMA. She will deal with that in just one moment. The general point, though, served against everything you've heard today and indeed what is in the written reps, is that with the exception of what we're going to do with the modification, there are no asks by the objectors to modify this policy, and there are no points that go to soundness. But Ms Bartle will just cross the I's and dot the T's on the mix for you.
Yes, to confirm that position, the mix was assessed, or the potential for housing mix assessed through the application, and deemed appropriate to finalise that precise mix as reserved matters come forward. So the consideration of what could be achieved and its relationship to the SHMA, which was the most recent evidence at the time, was considered and acknowledged that a mix of housing, including apartments but not solely apartments, could come forward on the site.
The question I'm asking really is whether or not that has already been fixed through reserved matters.
No, it hasn't yet been dealt with through reserved matters.
So all the officers assessed was that they were satisfied that in principle an appropriate mix could come forward, bearing in mind what was the latest evidence at that time. That mix will be secured through the RM.
Okay, then, unless there's anything else on York Central, I will move along to our next site. And that is then issue 4.2. Policy SS6. And British Sugar / Manor School.
Thank you, sir. Ms Bartle will introduce this as well.
Yeah, so I should say that's ST1. The Citex ST1.
Yes, this is another significant brownfield site within the city. Former industrial site associated with British Sugar's operations. The site includes a smaller proportion of what was former school, which is now owned by, or still owned by, the City Council. The majority of the site, which excludes part of that bit that's related to the school, does have the benefit of outline planning permission, which was approved in 2018. That approval was for up to 1,000 homes, along with some other community uses and open space provision. The application was followed, the planning permission, sorry, was followed by 2 further applications. The first was a full permission and approval for significant engineering and remediation works for the reclamation of the site, and also for the construction of access roads to get across the former Manor School site. Work has continued significantly to discharge pre-commencement conditions, and the work to bring forward the site and begin that remediation work is underway. The outline application gave 7 years for, or required, sorry, reserve matters within 7 years. It's a recognition of the extent to which the remediation works that were required on this site would require a longer than usual lead-in time.
Was the 7 years in relation to the submission of reserve matters?
Yes, sorry. And works underway to bring forward that application. We've determined that the site is therefore deliverable by virtue of those consents that are on the site, and we are anticipating delivery later in our 5-year supply, so in year 5, in recognition of the work to bring forward the site that's still required, but nonetheless it's still deliverable. And that relates to the site that does have permission. The smaller section of the site, which is the council-owned element, we anticipate coming forward a little later and has capacity for approximately 100 homes. Work on that site, feasibility work on that section is underway, but had been held back, well not held back, but had been, was deliberately coming after the access arrangements had been agreed and secured through the site, which they now have. In terms of modifications to the policy, which is policy SS6, we are not proposing any changes to the capacity. The first criterion relates to the mix of houses and gives reference to the SMAR. The council is actually proposing to delete this, and it's a consistent modification that we're proposing across all of the site-specific policies, on the basis that, given the revisions that we've made or proposed, to policy H3, we simply think this is a repetition of what's achieved and secured through that policy, so is in effect superfluous in this instance. So that's proposed to be deleted.
Can you just remind me about the changes to policy H3?
The changes to policy H3 weren't in principle changes. They were rewording and updating the reference to the local housing need assessment, which has now replaced the SMAR, and better clarity in terms of the operation of the policy and how it would rely on that evidence combined with on-site assessments.
Yeah, and if I recall, I think, again, tell me if I've got this wrong, or if I'm recalling correctly, but I think that also refers to any other new assessment that should be produced, doesn't it?
Indeed,
something
yeah,
like that.
it gives that security that it's not just the local housing needs assessment that can be relied upon as other evidence emerges that is appropriate.
And that's to ensure that as a matter of development plan policy, that decisions are always made based on the most up-to-date evidence of housing need.
Correct, yes. Then, so the only other modification to the policy text we're proposing is at the fifth criterion, which relates to the sink, the B-bank sink that's on the site. And the phrasing towards the end of that provision, as it proposed, says significant buffering would be required. Given the work that has been undertaken to secure the discharge of planning conditions associated with this, and it would be better suited to replace significant with appropriate. So that's the modification that proposed there. In relation to that, there are some minor modifications to the explanatory text, which seek to clarify the position again, given the discharge of planning conditions that have been achieved, and the reference at paragraph 3.41 to the end of that paragraph, where it says that phasing should coincide or correspond to the life cycle of the bees, proposed to delete because the phasing that's come through the work on the biodiversity protection plan, which was discharged in 2020, requires no phasing in that respect. So it's not necessary to include that wording in the explanatory text. Yeah.
Right, so a reserved matters approval, then, as I understand it, relates to phasing, and I think what you're saying is that that phasing requirement through the reserved matters approval does not refer to the life cycle of bees in the biodiversity protection plan. Is that?
Not quite. There's no reserved matters through discharge of planning condition.
Okay.
So I think that's it in terms of our summary of the position.
Mr. Jones.
Yes, thank you, sir. Ms. Bartle's made my job rather easy, I think, by just picking up on those main modifications. But I think really I just want to thank Ms. Bartle for explaining the position in terms of the sites and the permissions themselves. We've set out in our statements the position on the planning permissions, so the details are in there should you require that information. I think it's just important for me to stress that as representative of British Sugar, here today, British Sugar remain committed to the implementation of the further permissions and the delivery of housing and associated community facilities on the site. British Sugar is effectively acting as master developer for the site and therefore is confident in terms of the delivery and the timescales for the delivery that again have been set out in the written statements and are reflected in the Council's housing or updated housing trajectory information. So I think really on that basis we're fully supportive of the policy and the allocation for obvious reasons. We consider it to be soundly based in response to the specific question that's being asked. I think the only additional point that I'd like to make is one that's set out in our written statement and relates more to the proposals map than the actual sort of policy wording itself, but I think it's probably appropriate to just pick it up here, if I may. And this is set out at 2.7 of our written statement on this matter. So the proposals map, the draft proposals map or policies map, includes an annotation to the north of site ST1, which identifies a potential new bridge and enhancements to across the Harrogate rail line, and potential for adjoining safeguarded land for potential future transport improvements. We have no objection to that, but I think we just want to make the point that, consistent with our previous representations, there's no, as far as we know, there's no funding currently available for those improvements. And at the planning application stage, the transport impacts of the British Sugar development were thoroughly tested. And at that time, there was no need for any rail link improvements to demonstrate that the British Sugar site itself and the development proposed was suitable in planning terms. So the approved master plan as it's designed makes allowance for this facility, i.e., it could be delivered, but it's not a requirement of the British Sugar permissions. And in our view, the policy, or perhaps elsewhere within the plan, it just needs to be made clear that that's therefore not a specific requirement of the development. But that aside, as I say, we want to offer and lend our full support to the policy and the allocation. Thank you.
So short responses from us on that. It's not part of the permission, it's not condition, not subject to an obligation, it's not required if they're going to build out the permissions they have. That's self-evident, but Ms Bartle will give you slightly more of the background on the bridge.
Sorry.
Yeah, just so I'm clear, Ms Bartle. So, yeah, I'm looking at the annotation pointed to by Mr Jones, and, well, yeah, it sort of looks like a bridge, doesn't it? And potential future transport scheme, says the policies map key.
Yes, this is deliberately not dealt with in the policy concerning the British Sugar site, and is related to policy T5 of the plan. Deliberately not dealt with for the reasons Mr Henderson has outlined, that there is no obligation on British Sugar to bring forward that, but rather it's an aspiration of the Council related to its transport planning activities. Should you feel we need to make a change to do it, we can do, but we don't feel that that is necessary at this stage.
And I think Mr Jones was pushing for something in the plan that says what you've just said. Is that necessary for soundness?
No, sir, not when the plan's read as a whole and you have regard to T5. It's in our submission clear from that, from the plan as a whole.
Are you concerned, Mr Jones, that the plan hits you for that?
I think our concern is just that it's not clearly it may be that we come back to this at policy T5 if that's to be dealt with in the phase 4 sessions. And I'm very happy to deal with it that way. But I think on reading the policies map, it's not clear whether it's a requirement on the British Sugar Development site or not. I welcome what has been said this morning in terms of it not being a requirement, and as has been said, that's clear from the permissions themselves. So I understand the point there, but on reading of the policies map as it stands at the moment, I don't think it is clear. So some clarity on that in policy T5, if that's the appropriate place, would be beneficial in my view.
Well, so the issue with the submission you've just heard is you don't read the map in isolation. You look at it alongside the policies, and it's not part of policy SS6. It's clearly part of T5. It is in our submission, therefore clear.
Anything else on that, Mr. Jones?
Only to say, if we do have the opportunity to just pick it up in the phase 4 sessions on the T5, I'd welcome that.
Certainly.
Sir, can I... Oh, sorry, I'll let Mr.
Councillor Waters.
Thank you, sir. This is purely for my own curiosity. My ears sort of perked up when I heard about Manor School, council-owned site, and 100 homes going on there. Is it still the council's position that was stated at public inquiry in 2006 to a planning inspector that only the developed existing footprint of that site would ever be built on? Because it's a very, very important point for the people that live there. It's a very prominent site on the roadside with the school playing fields, and as I say, previous commitment to retain those playing fields. If it assists, I've actually got the 2006 Derwentthorpe public inquiry in full, if anybody wants me to reference that commitment.
So the short answer to that is that the council's position is what is set out in the policies. We haven't made that commitment in the policies. As the council brings forward the site and applications are made in due course, they will comply with those policies. But that is that. We won't go any further today, and there's no need to go any further today.
So as I understand Councillor Waters, in effect the concern is about the potential loss of playing fields. Is that right, Councillor Waters?
Yes, sir.
Clearly, I haven't been there yet, so I don't know if someone can help me. When I go there, will I see some playing fields?
Not in active use, no.
What I'm driving at is there open space there?
There is, to an extent. That part of the site, as you'll see from when you visit, will form what will be the entrance to the broader site, the bigger site that British Sugar have the permission on. So it's an integral part of accessing the bigger site, and indeed the permission that's been granted for the road access cuts through that part of the site.
So it cuts through the former playing fields?
To an extent, yes. To an extent, yes.
But so this isn't an open space criteria. It's not like what we talked about last week where there was an existing open space that we're looking to preserve or retain. We're not in that position here.
So the council says then that there isn't currently any open space on this land. Is that right?
Yes, correct.
The answer to that is, sir, I'll look forward to you viewing the situation for yourself on the ground. I'll dig out the commitment that was made in 2006 later on for you. It's a similar commitment that was made to Lowfield School, which was similarly disregarded. But there's been an awful lot of concern about the loss of open space on that site by the local ward councillors and the local residents. And there was quite a campaign a few years ago when this was first mentioned.
So what's happened then? I'm guessing, you know, from what I'm hearing, there were playing fields there. There, as I understand it, aren't any more. So have they stopped becoming open space?
No, so there were playing fields there. They are no longer in use. The planning permission uses at least part of that land in the way that Miss Bartle has described to you. An alternative open space has been secured through the planning permission, but it is not a case in our submission of simply retaining those fields or anything of that nature. Essentially, this is a question of master planning the whole site. So that includes an element of open space. What we're not doing is preserving in situ the former school playing fields. We're taking a more holistic approach to the site as a whole and the relationship between the two parts of the site. And I must say, I'm not very clear. Is Councillor Waters saying this is not sound? What is his request? What's the modification proposed? Or is this just another general comment? Because it's very unclear on this side of the room, sir.
My understanding of Councillor Waters' request was that the plan should limit built development to the built footprint of the school, I think, and avoid the former playing fields. Have I got that right?
Yes, sir, and it was just a general comment because I'm actually here really to speak to ST4 and ST7, and in relation to ST7, I brought the full...
If I can hold you there,
yeah.
Because I think ST7's this afternoon, isn't it? And not everyone for ST7 is here yet, so it would be unfair to talk about it now.
It was just with having brought the 2006 public inquiry document in full, and I can quite clearly remember what was said in relation to Manor School. I can dig out the relevant paragraph later if you wish.
Well, sir, we don't have this document, so that's the first point. But secondly, on the principle of it, the effect of the modification that you're being asked to make is to sterilise part of the site such that it can't be brought forward in a master planned way. There is no good reason to do that, not least when the council has secured open space provision within the permissions that it is already granted. So nothing's been overlooked, it's just been dealt with in a different way, and in a way which in our submission is considerably more appropriate than demarcating and preserving in situ in the way that's been suggested.
Okay, I understand the difference between you. I know, as is often the case, that you are not going to agree. Mr. Jones, you're indicating?
Yes, hopefully just some helpful points of clarification. Clearly the former Manor School site, as has been said earlier, is not owned by British Sugar. It's a council-owned site, but nevertheless, we have a detailed understanding of the history of that site because it's been integral to being able to deliver our site. So I think the first thing to say is that there is an implemented permission, which is reference 1701072 FUL, which was granted in September 2017, which was for the demolition of the former Manor School buildings and the construction of the link road across the site. And that permission has actually been implemented and is extant. You'll see when you go there, sir, that the Manor School building, the former Manor School buildings have been demolished. The second thing to say, again, just picking up on a point that was made previously, is that yes, as part of the approved outline permission for the British Sugar site, there is significant and extensive public open space provision. I don't have the figures with me immediately, but you'll see that if you look at the approved permission. And in coming to those provisions and that open space provision in particular, a full, thorough, detailed assessment was done of playing pitch facilities and open space requirements. And clearly, you know, in approving that permission, that was deemed to be acceptable. That's it. Hopefully that's of help, but I just thought I'd raise those points of clarification. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for that. I understand the issue now about open space. Is there anything else on this site that I need to know?
So only one point from us. Hopefully Mr. Jones can provide clarification. There's a suggestion in his hearing statement that he'd like a modification to the second criterion, but he hasn't pushed that this morning. I'm assuming he's not pushing that anymore.
No, that's correct.
I'm very grateful.
Okay, very good. Anything else on the British School stroke Manor School, British Sugar stroke Manor School, site ST1? Okay, very good. Thank you. I will move then to policy SS7. This is, where are we? Issue 4.3. I think. Either way, it's policy SS7. Civil service sports ground. That's site ST2.
Yes, this takes us not far from the British Sugar site to a site that has a full planning permission for a total of 266 homes, which was allowed on appeal in October 2019. All pre-commencement conditions have been discharged and works have in fact started on the site, with the marketing and sales office now open. Miller Homes are developing the site out and indeed marketing those properties currently. There was a Section 73 application to amend some of the house types on the site, and that was approved in June 2022, so no issues with that hampering our delivery expectations that we put forward in the trajectory. In terms of modifications, I think there are only a few. The table H1 table 5.2 in policy H1 yes, incorrectly or just requires an update to the number to be consistent with the application to 266. And then, as I explained on the previous site, we were looking at a deletion of the first criterion relating to the housing mix policy simply for consistency with the approach that the council is seeking to take. Yes, so in terms of delivery and our approach to that, clearly evidence of a deliverable site by virtue of the activity that's ongoing on there at the moment, and no reason to see that the trajectory and the forecast that we predicted or put forward in the trajectory should in any way differ.
And that's the trajectory agreed with Miller Homes, who are on site.
Anyone on this? Okay, very good. I'll take anything else as I have it in writing then. So let us move to policy SS8. That's issue 4.4, I think. Land adjacent to Hull Road, that's site ST4.
So the update on this is there is a signed statement of common ground with persimmon. You don't have that though, and I'm looking behind me, and I don't have copies either because I think it was signed this morning. But that's the update. We will get you some copies as soon as we can, probably at the first break. So, but Miss Bartle will essentially summarise what the agreed position is for you.
Yes, indeed. Just by way of background and in terms of its planning status, the site doesn't have planning permission, although there are 2 applications that are before the council, and one of those applications relates to a scheme for 175 homes and the other 73 homes. That's simply a reflection of the land ownership position, but in fact the 2 applications are present a contiguous scheme that's been master planned. And